Now let's begin. Drew Blair stood in the kitchen of his suburban home, watching his 8-year-old son Mason meticulously arrange dinosaur figures on the counter while waiting for his after-school snack. The kid had that concentrated look he always got when organizing things, tongue poking slightly between his teeth. Drew smiled despite the tension coiled in his shoulders from a long day of editing footage for his latest documentary. "Dad, did you know the Spinosaurus was actually a really good swimmer?" Mason asked without looking up from his prehistoric lineup. "I did not know that, buddy. That's pretty cool." Drew grabbed an apple from the fruit bowl and started slicing it. Mason had always been a sturdy kid, solid like Drew's side of the family, but lately Christy's mother Gladys had been making pointed comments about his weight. 8 years old, and she was already poisoning the kid's mind with body image garbage. The front door opened and Christy walked in, her expression immediately tightening when she saw Drew preparing Mason's snack. "Drew, maybe just the apple? Without the peanut butter." "He's a growing kid, Chris. He needs protein," my mother said. "Your mother isn't a nutritionist." Drew kept his tone level, but something sharp moved beneath the surface. This had been happening more frequently since Gladys had moved to their town 6 months ago. Before that, when she'd lived 3 states away, their marriage had been solid. Now every parenting decision became a debate, with Gladys's opinions delivered through Christy like some toxic proxy. Christy's jaw tightened. She's just trying to help. Mason, sensing the shift in atmosphere like kids always did, had gone quiet. Drew handed him the apple slices with peanut butter and ruffled his hair. "Go watch your show, bud. We'll play basketball when I'm done with work." After Mason left, Christy crossed her arms. "You're undermining me in front of him. I'm feeding our son a healthy snack. When did that become undermining you?" Drew began washing the knife, needing something to do with his hands. "Look, I know Gladys means well. Do you? Because you've been pretty hostile toward her lately." Drew turned to face his wife. She looked tired, he realized, worn in a way that had nothing to do with physical exhaustion. "I'm not hostile. I'm protective. Of Mason. Of you, when you let me be." Christy's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and her whole body language shifted. "My mother's coming for dinner tomorrow. She wants to help with Mason's meal plan." "Absolutely not. Drew. He's 8, Christy. 8. He doesn't need a meal plan. He needs parents who let him be a kid." The argument circled and died like they all did lately, unresolved and adding another layer to the sediment of resentment building between them. Drew retreated to his office, a converted spare bedroom filled with hard drives, cameras, and the organized chaos of his work. Documentary filmmaking didn't pay like his old investigative journalism gig at the Tribune, but it let him pursue stories that mattered. Currently, he was working on a piece about corporate negligence in nursing homes. Ironic, given his current family situation. His phone buzzed. Brad Tucker, his best friend since college. "You sound stressed," Brad said without preamble when Drew answered. "That obvious? I can hear it in your breathing, man. What's happening?" Drew filled him in on the Gladys situation. Brad, who worked in legal compliance for a major firm and had seen every flavor of family dysfunction, listened without interrupting. "Document everything," Brad said finally. "I'm serious. Keep a log. Dates, times, what she says. You might need it." "You think it's that bad?" "I think mother-in-laws who obsess over controlling their grandkids don't usually stop at suggestions. And I think your gut is telling you something. Trust it." Drew did trust his gut. It had served him well during his journalism days when he'd broken stories about city council corruption and pharmaceutical company cover-ups. That same instinct was screaming now, but he couldn't yet articulate what it was warning him about. The next evening, Gladys Ortega arrived at 5:30 p.m. sharp, wearing a cream-colored blazer and carrying a leather-bound notebook. She was a handsome woman in her early 60s, with steel gray hair cut in a severe bob and the kind of posture that suggested military school or ballet training. She'd been a high school administrator before retiring, and she carried that authority like a weapon. "Drew," she said, offering a thin smile that never reached her eyes. "Christy tells me you've been resistant to implementing some healthy changes for Mason." "Hello, Gladys. Come in." Drew stepped aside, already feeling the temperature drop in his own home. Mason hugged his grandmother, who patted his shoulder with the mechanical affection of someone checking off a list item. "Hello, sweet boy. Are you ready to start feeling better?" "I feel fine, Grandma," Mason said, confused. Gladys's smile sharpened. "Of course you do. But Grandma knows best. Dinner was grilled chicken breast, steamed vegetables, and brown rice. Gladys had insisted on supervising the preparation, making small disapproving sounds whenever Christy added any seasoning. Drew watched Mason push food around his plate, the joy sucked out of a simple family meal. "You need to eat, Mason," Gladys said. "This is food that will help you grow strong, not fat." Drew's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. "Gladys." "It's all right, Drew," Christy interjected quickly. "Mom's right. We should be modeling better habits." "He's not fat," Drew said evenly. "He's a healthy, active kid." Gladys dabbed her mouth with a napkin. "I've seen the photos, Drew. The ones from the school play last month. The camera adds 10 pounds, and even accounting for that." "Enough." Drew stood. "Mason, you're excused. Go wash up and pick out 2 books for bedtime." After Mason left, grateful for the escape, Drew turned to Gladys. "You don't get to comment on my son's body. Not now, not ever." Gladys's expression remained eerily calm. Someone has to care about his future. Childhood obesity leads to diabetes, heart disease, a lifetime of struggle. I'm trying to prevent suffering. By giving him a complex? He's 8. "Drew," Christy's voice was pleading. "She's just trying to help." Drew looked at his wife, really looked at her, and saw someone he barely recognized. When had she stopped fighting her mother? When had Gladys's voice become louder than her own? Gladys stood smoothly. "I can see I'm not wanted here tonight. Christy, darling, walk me out." After they left the room, Drew cleared the table with controlled movements, each plate placed in the dishwasher with deliberate care. He heard Christy and Gladys murmuring in the entryway, their voices low and conspiratorial. When Christy returned, her eyes were red. "She's crying because I stood up for our son? She's crying because you're cruel to her," Christy shot back. "She just wants to be involved in our lives." There's involved, and there's controlling. She's crossed that line. They didn't speak for the rest of the evening. Drew read Mason his books, listened to his prayers, and tucked him in tight. "Dad," Mason asked as Drew reached the door. "Am I fat?" Drew's heart cracked. He sat back down on the bed. "You're perfect exactly as you are. You're growing, you're healthy, you're strong. Don't let anyone make you think different. Grandma says." "Grandma is wrong." Drew smoothed Mason's hair back from his forehead. "And I'm going to make sure she understands that." 3 days later, Drew was in his office reviewing interview footage when his phone rang. Christy's name flashed on the screen. Odd. She usually texted during the day. "Drew, you need to come home." Her voice was strange. "Flat. What's wrong? Is Mason okay? Just come home." He made it in 12 minutes, heart hammering. Christy met him at the door, and behind her he could hear Mason crying. Not the normal crying of a hurt knee or a broken toy. This was anguished, painful sobbing. Drew pushed past Christy and found Mason on the bathroom floor, pale and sweating, tears streaming down his face. The smell hit Drew immediately. Something was very wrong. "Buddy, what happened?" Drew gathered Mason into his arms, feeling how his son was trembling. "My stomach hurts so bad, Dad. I can't." Mason's face crumpled and he twisted away, vomiting into the toilet. "How long has this been going on?" Drew demanded, looking at Christy. "About an hour. He came home from school fine, had a snack at Mom's house." "At Gladys's house?" Drew's voice was sharp. "What did she give him?" "Just, I don't know, cookies and milk." "Drew, he's been in here 6 times already. He can't stop." Mason whimpered, and Drew felt white-hot rage beginning to burn through his chest. "Call Ricardo. Tell him I need him to bring his camera. Now." "What? What?" "Just do it, Christy." Drew stayed with Mason, holding him, getting him water, wiping his face with a cool cloth. The kid was shaking with exhaustion, his skin clammy. Between episodes, Drew asked gentle questions. "Mason, did the cookies taste funny at all?" "A little bitter," Mason whispered. "But Grandma said they were a special recipe. To help me feel better." Drew closed his eyes. The rage was now a cold, focused thing. A tool. Ricardo Hardin arrived 30 minutes later with his camera. Drew's longtime colleague and friend, Ricardo, was a bear of a man with a gentle soul and an eye for capturing truth. He took one look at Mason and his expression hardened. "Document everything," Drew said quietly. "Timestamps. His condition. Everything." Ricardo nodded, understanding without explanation. They'd worked enough stories together to have a shorthand. By the time it was over, 6 hours had passed. Mason had vomited 11 times, had diarrhea too many times to count, and was so dehydrated that Drew was seriously considering the ER. Christy had called Gladys twice, but her mother hadn't answered. Finally, around 9 p.m., Gladys called back. Drew answered Christy's phone. "How's my grandson?" Gladys asked, her tone light. "How do you think he is?" "What did you give him?" "Just some cookies. A special recipe I found online. All natural ingredients to help with digestion and weight management." Drew's hand tightened on the phone. "He's been sick for 6 hours, Gladys. Violently sick." "What was in those cookies?" A pause. Then, "Nothing harmful. Just some herbs. Maybe he's having a cleansing reaction." "That's actually a good sign. His body purging toxins." "Toxins," Drew repeated flatly. "Yes, it's all part of the process. He'll feel much better tomorrow, and probably a few pounds lighter too. Win-win." She sounded pleased. "Actually pleased. You poisoned my son." "Don't be dramatic, Drew. I gave him natural supplements. If you fed him properly, this wouldn't be necessary." Drew ended the call. His hands were steady. His mind was clear. He looked at Christy, who'd heard every word on speaker. "Drew, she didn't mean. She poisoned him. It was just, Drew, she thought she was helping. It was a mistake. A bad joke. A joke." Drew's voice could have cut glass. "Our son spent 6 hours crying in a bathroom, and you're calling it a joke?" "I'll talk to her. She'll apologize. We can." "No." Drew walked to his office and closed the door. He sat at his desk and pulled out his phone, scrolled through his contacts, found the name he was looking for. Lloyd Fowler answered on the second ring. "Blair, long time. I need you to investigate someone for me. Complete background. Everything you can find. Especially anything involving children or positions of authority over kids." Lloyd, a private investigator who'd helped Drew on several stories over the years, didn't ask questions. "Name? Gladys Ortega. I'm sending you her details now. How fast do you need this?" "Yesterday. I'll start tonight." "Drew, this personal?" "Very. Then I'll dig deep." After hanging up with Lloyd, Drew made a second call. "Brad Tucker. I need to know my legal options," Drew said. "All of them. Tell me everything." Drew did. When he finished, Brad was quiet for a long moment. "You could file a police report for child endangerment, possibly assault. But without knowing exactly what she gave him, it'll be hard to prove intent." "What else?" "Restraining order. Documentation for custody issues if it comes to that." "Drew, I know you. I can hear where your head is going. Whatever you're planning. I'm planning to protect my son. Just remember, whatever you do, think 3 moves ahead. Like chess." Drew hung up and sat in the darkness of his office. Through the door, he could hear Christy putting Mason to bed, her voice soft and soothing. His wife. The woman he'd loved since they'd met at a gallery opening 9 years ago. She'd been vibrant then, passionate about art history and full of opinions she wasn't afraid to voice. Gladys had been a distant figure, someone they saw twice a year and spoke to occasionally. Then Gladys's husband had died 2 years ago, and slowly, incrementally, she'd tightened her grip on her daughter. The move to their town 6 months ago had accelerated everything. Drew opened his laptop and created a new folder, Gladys. Inside, he began documenting every incident, every comment, every time she'd overstepped. His journalism training kicked in, dates, times, witnesses, context. Ricardo's footage from today went into the folder. Drew also backed it up to 3 separate encrypted drives. Around midnight, Christy knocked on his door. "Drew." He didn't turn around. "Is he sleeping?" "Finally. I gave him some Pedialyte, and he kept it down." A pause. "I talked to my mother. She feels terrible. She didn't realize. She didn't realize giving a child unprescribed substances would make them sick?" Drew spun his chair to face her. "She's not stupid, Chris. She knew exactly what would happen. She just didn't care. That's not fair. She made a mistake." "You keep using that word. A mistake is giving him the wrong flavor of juice. This was calculated. She researched these herbs, acquired them, baked them into cookies, and deliberately gave them to our son without our knowledge or consent." Drew stood. "And the fact that you can't see how fucked up that is tells me how deep her hooks are in you." Christy's face crumpled. "She's my mother, and he's our son. Who comes first?" She left without answering, and Drew knew their marriage had just crossed a line it might not come back from. The next morning, Mason was weak but stable. Drew kept him home from school and worked from the couch, keeping an eye on him. Mason dozed on and off, too exhausted to even watch TV properly. At 2 p.m., Drew's phone rang. "Lloyd, you're not going to believe what I found," Lloyd said. "Actually, knowing you, you might. Your mother-in-law had a very interesting career." "Tell me." "She was a high school administrator for 23 years. Forced into early retirement 3 years ago following an incident. School board sealed the records, but I've got a source. She was accused of forcing students she deemed overweight into extreme diet protocols. Had at least 2 kids hospitalized. One parent tried to press charges, but the school district settled quietly and made it all go away." Drew's pulse quickened. "You can prove this?" "Working on it. But there's more. Since retiring, she's been active on some really disturbing online communities. Forums dedicated to childhood obesity prevention that are basically pro-ana groups for parents. She posts under a pseudonym, but I traced the IP. Drew, some of the stuff she shared, recipes for cleansing children, methods to restrict food without the kid realizing it, how to make a child feel ashamed enough to stop eating. Jesus Christ. I'm compiling everything. Should have a full report by tomorrow. But Drew, this woman is dangerous. Like, clinically. This isn't just an overbearing grandmother. This is pathological." After Lloyd hung up, Drew sat very still. Around him, the normal sounds of his home continued. The refrigerator humming, the heater clicking on, Mason's soft breathing. Everything normal. Everything wrong. He thought about chess. About thinking 3 moves ahead. Then he started making calls. Dorothy Kim's office was decorated in soft blues and greens, with toys in one corner and a child-sized table covered in art supplies. She was a child psychologist Drew had met while researching a documentary about educational trauma. She'd been generous with her time then, and she was generous now, agreeing to see Mason on short notice. Drew waited in the lobby while Dorothy talked with Mason, watching through the one-way glass as his son played with building blocks and answered questions. Mason's shoulders were hunched in a way they'd never been before. Something had been taken from him in those 6 hours of suffering. After 45 minutes, Dorothy invited Drew back in. Mason went to play in the corner while the adults talked. "He's showing signs of anxiety around food," Dorothy said quietly. "He mentioned his grandmother several times, always in the context of things he shouldn't eat or ways he should change his body." "Drew, how long has this been happening?" Drew showed her his documentation. The comments, the incidents, the escalation over 6 months. Dorothy's expression grew grave. "This is psychological abuse," she said. "What happened with the cookies was physical abuse as well. You need to understand, this will have lasting effects if it's not addressed immediately." "I'm addressing it." Dorothy studied him. "I know that look. I've worked with enough investigative journalists. Whatever you're planning, make sure Mason is protected first." "That's exactly what I'm doing." Drew took Mason home and made him grilled cheese and tomato soup, comfort food. They ate together at the kitchen table, and Drew noticed how Mason hesitated before each bite, glancing toward the door as if Gladys might appear. "She's not coming over anymore," Drew said gently. "Not without my permission." "You're safe, bud." "Did I do something wrong?" Mason asked in a small voice. "No. God, no. Adults did something wrong. I did something wrong by not protecting you sooner. But that's changing now." Christy came home late, after Mason was asleep. She looked haggard, and Drew felt a flicker of sympathy before remembering her calling it a joke. "I've been at my mother's," she said. "She's devastated. She can't stop crying." Mason couldn't stop vomiting. Christy flinched. I know it was wrong. But cutting her out completely, Drew, she's family. She abused our son. She made a mistake." Drew pulled out his laptop and turned it toward Christy. On the screen was Lloyd's preliminary report. "Read." He watched his wife's face as she scrolled through the findings. The color drained from her cheeks. Her hands started shaking. "This can't be real," she whispered. "It's real, and it's who she's always been. You just couldn't see it because she's your mother." Christy looked up, tears streaming. "What are you going to do?" "What I should have done the first time she commented on Mason's weight. I'm going to stop her." "How?" Drew closed the laptop. "Do you trust me?" Christy swallowed hard. "I don't know anymore." "Then trust that I love Mason more than I hate your mother. Everything I do is for him." Over the next 3 days, Drew orchestrated his plan with the precision of his best investigative work. He contacted Brad, Lloyd, Ricardo, and one more person, Nora Frank, a former colleague who now worked for the state's Child Protective Services. "If what you're telling me is accurate, Nora said over coffee at a discreet location. We'd want to investigate. But Drew, you know how this works. We need probable cause. We need evidence that's airtight. You'll have it. And you need to be clean. If this looks like a vendetta, it's not a vendetta. It's protection. For Mason and for any other kid she might hurt. Nora studied him. You were always the best at finding the story beneath the story. All right. I'll need everything you've got. Drew handed her a thumb drive. That's copies of everything Lloyd found, plus my own documentation. Medical records from Mason's pediatrician showing he's perfectly healthy. The footage from that night. And testimonies I've collected from 3 parents whose kids went to the school where Gladys worked. They were afraid to speak up before. They're not anymore. Nora plugged the drive into her laptop and started reading. Her expression darkened. Jesus, this is worse than you said. I know. Give me 24 hours. I need to bring this to my supervisor and coordinate with some other departments. The hardest part was keeping Christy in the dark about the specifics. She knew something was coming, but Drew couldn't risk her warning Gladys. He hated the distance between them, but Mason's safety came first. Gladys called twice a day, trying to reach Christy. On the 3rd day, Drew answered. I'd like to see my grandson, Gladys said, her voice icy. That's not happening. Christy said you've been poisoning her mind against me. Telling lies. Everything I've told her is documented fact. But speaking of poison, how are you feeling, Gladys? A pause. What's that supposed to mean? Just that karma has a way of coming around. You spent your career hurting kids in the name of helping them. You moved here to do the same to Mason. Did you really think there wouldn't be consequences? You can't keep me from my family. Watch me. Drew hung up. His phone immediately rang again. Christy, what did you say to her? She's hysterical. I told her the truth. Drew, she's my mother. You can't just. I can. I am. And Chris, you need to decide where you stand. With her or with us. Silence. Then, that's not fair. None of this is fair. But it's necessary. That night, Drew couldn't sleep. He stood in Mason's doorway, watching his son sleep, and thought about all the ways he'd failed to protect him sooner. All the warning signs he'd rationalized away because keeping the peace seemed important. Never again. Brad called at midnight. It's done. The restraining order is filed. She'll be served tomorrow morning. What are our chances? With what you've provided? Strong. The judge will see the pattern. But Drew, be ready. She's going to fight this. And if Christy sides with her mother, then I'll cross that bridge when I come to it. The next morning, Drew was feeding Mason breakfast when Nora called. We're moving forward, she said. CPS is opening an investigation. Given her history and the severity of the incident, we're also coordinating with the police. They'll be filing charges for child endangerment at minimum. When? Today? We're serving her at 10 a.m. Drew checked his watch. I'll be there. Drew, you can't. I'm not interfering. I'm documenting. This is my story now. He called Ricardo. Meet me at Gladys's address. Bring everything. Christy emerged from the bedroom as he was gathering his things. Where are you going? To end this. Drew, stay with Mason. Keep him safe. That's all I need from you right now. He left before she could respond. Gladys lived in a tidy townhouse in a development for active seniors. Drew and Ricardo set up across the street, camera ready. At 10:03 a.m., 2 police officers and a CPS worker approached her door. Ricardo filmed as Gladys answered, her face going from confusion to outrage as they spoke. She was holding papers, the restraining order, Drew realized. She started shouting, loud enough that neighbors emerged from their homes. This is outrageous. I have rights. That man is brainwashing my daughter. One officer remained calm, professional, explaining something Drew couldn't hear from this distance. The CPS worker handed Gladys another set of documents. Gladys's screaming intensified. I was helping that boy. Someone needed to. He was getting fat and lazy, and his father encourages it. More neighbors now. Phone's coming out. Drew felt a grim satisfaction. This was exactly what he'd counted on. Gladys's inability to control herself when challenged. The police officer said something else, and Gladys's face went pale. She stumbled backward. The CPS worker caught her arm, steadying her. That's the moment she realized, Drew said quietly. Ricardo kept filming. Realized what? That she's not in control anymore. That she can't manipulate or intimidate her way out of this one. They watched as Gladys was helped inside, one officer following. The other stayed on the porch, calling something in on his radio. 15 minutes later, a third vehicle arrived. 2 men in suits emerged. "Who are they?" Ricardo asked. Drew smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. "State investigators. I made some calls to the education board. Turns out when you settle abuse allegations with taxpayer money, those records don't stay sealed forever if someone knows where to look. You're terrifying when you're focused. You know that? I'm a father protecting his son." They filmed for another hour as various officials entered and exited the townhouse. Neighbors clustered in groups, speculating. Drew caught snippets of conversation. "Always thought she was odd. Remember when she yelled at the Henderson kid for eating ice cream? Called my grandson chunky at the pool last summer." The court of public opinion was turning. Drew had counted on that too. Around noon, Gladys was escorted from her home, not in handcuffs, but clearly under some form of custody. Her face was tear-streaked, her perfect composure shattered. She looked directly at Drew across the street, and he met her gaze steadily. He didn't smile, didn't gloat, just watched as the woman who'd hurt his son faced the first real consequences of her actions. His phone rang. "Christy, what did you do?" Her voice was anguished. "What I had to. Is Mason okay?" "He's fine. He's playing." "Drew, my mother just called me from. They arrested her. They're questioning her." "Not quite the same thing. How can you be so calm about this?" "Because our son is safe now. Because she can't hurt him anymore. Because she's finally being held accountable. She's my mother. And I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry you had a mother who values control over love. But I'm not sorry for protecting Mason. I'll never be sorry for that." Christy was crying. "I don't know what to do. Come home. Be with Mason. That's all you need to do right now." Drew hung up and turned to Ricardo. "Let's wrap up. What happens next?" "Next, I edit this footage into a documentary. Next, I make sure every parent in this city knows what Gladys Ortega did and what she's capable of. Next, I ensure she never has access to another child." Ricardo started packing up equipment. "You know she'll sue you for defamation. Let her try? Truth is an absolute defense." They drove back to Drew's house in silence. When Drew walked in, Mason ran to him immediately. "Dad, where were you?" Drew scooped him up, even though he was really getting too big for it. "Taking care of some grown-up stuff." "Did you have a good morning with Mom?" "We made pancakes. The Mickey Mouse kind." Drew looked at Christy over Mason's head. She looked wrecked, but she'd made their son pancakes. "It was something." "That's great, bud. Why don't you go play while I talk to Mom for a minute?" After Mason left, Christy and Drew stood in the kitchen, an ocean of words between them. "She says you planted evidence," Christy said quietly. "That you made all this up to turn me against her. Do you believe that?" Christy was quiet for a long time. Then, "No. I want to. God, I want to. But I can't ignore what you showed me. What she did to Mason. What she did to those other kids." She looked up, tears streaming. "How did I not see it?" "Because she's your mother and you loved her. Because she spent your whole life teaching you to question yourself instead of her. Because abuse is harder to see when it comes from family. I should have protected him. You're protecting him now. That's what matters." Christy wiped her eyes. "What happens to her?" "That depends on the investigation. Best case for her, she gets probation and mandatory counseling. Worst case, she serves time for child endangerment. Either way, she won't be around Mason unsupervised. Ever. She'll hate me for not standing by her. Then she'll hate you. But Mason will know his mother chose him." The story broke 3 days later. Drew had worked around the clock, editing footage, compiling documentation, and crafting a narrative that was bulletproof. He released it first on his independent documentary platform, then licensed portions to local news. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Former students of Gladys's school came forward with their own stories. Parents who'd been intimidated into silence found their voices. The school district that had sealed her records was suddenly facing questions from journalists and state legislators. Gladys's lawyer issued a statement calling it a witch hunt orchestrated by a vindictive son-in-law. The statement made things worse. More people came forward. Drew sat in his office, monitoring the response, when Brad called. "You've started an avalanche," Brad said. "The DA's office just announced they're expanding the investigation, looking into whether the school district knowingly allowed a predator access to kids." "Good. Drew, she's going to come after you with everything. Her lawyer is already talking about filing motions. Let him. Everything I published is true and documented. He'll have to prove malice, and he can't, because there isn't any. Just a father protecting his son and other kids from a dangerous person. Still, be careful. Drew ended the call and found Christy standing in the doorway. She'd been staying at her mother's townhouse for the past 2 nights, unable to reconcile what she knew with what she felt. "Can we talk?" she asked. They sat on the couch in the living room, the space where they'd watched 1,000 movies and had 1,000 conversations. It felt like foreign territory now. "I've been reading everything," Christy said. "All the stories. All the accounts. Drew, there are so many. How did she hurt so many kids and just get away with it?" Because people like her are good at finding systems that protect them. School districts that care more about liability than children. Parents who are too tired or too intimidated to fight. She counted on that. But she made a mistake with Mason. What mistake? She forgot that some fathers won't stay quiet. That some people know how to fight the system from the inside. Christy was quiet. "Then, I called her yesterday. From the townhouse. Christy's voice broke. She wasn't sorry. She was angry. She said Mason deserved it. That he needed to learn. When I tried to defend him, she turned on me. Called me weak. Said I was a failure as a mother for letting him get fat." Drew waited. "He's not fat," Christy whispered. "He's perfect." And I let her make me believe there was something wrong with him. She looked at Drew, her eyes red. I let her make me believe there was something wrong with me for not seeing it. She's had a lifetime to perfect her manipulation. You couldn't have seen it without distance. You saw it. I'm not her daughter. I had the luxury of objectivity. Christy leaned against him, and Drew wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "Can we come back from this?" she asked. "I don't know, but we can try. For Mason." "For Mason," Christy agreed. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. Drew attended, sitting in the gallery with Ricardo. Gladys's lawyer, a slick corporate type named Earl Hughes, argued forcefully that his client had been the victim of a coordinated character assassination. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Maddie Strong, presented evidence methodically. The medical reports from Mason's pediatrician, testimony from the ER doctor who'd consulted, Lloyd's investigation findings, statements from former students and parents. Earl tried to get most of it excluded, claiming prejudice and hearsay. The judge, a no-nonsense man named Walter Hampton, wasn't buying it. "Mr. Hughes, your client has a documented pattern of behavior spanning decades. This court will not ignore that pattern because it's inconvenient for your defense." Gladys sat rigid in her chair, her face a mask. But when the judge ordered her to stay at least 500 feet from Mason and prohibited all contact, something cracked in her composure. "This is insane," she shouted, standing. "That's my grandson. You can't keep me from my family." Judge Hampton's expression didn't change. "Ms. Ortega, sit down or I'll hold you in contempt. I have rights. I'm being persecuted for trying to help a child. You poisoned a child. Sit down." Earl managed to get Gladys back in her seat, but the damage was done. The court reporter had captured every word. By evening, it would be in the news cycle. Drew felt no satisfaction, only a grim sense of completion. This was necessary. This was justice. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Drew had prepared a brief statement. "This case is about protecting children from adults who abuse positions of trust. It's about holding people accountable regardless of their relationship to the victim. And it's about breaking the silence that allows abuse to continue. If my story helps even one other parent recognize similar patterns and act sooner, then it's worth every difficulty we've faced." That night, Drew cooked dinner for his family. Real dinner, with butter and salt and flavor. Mason ate happily, the shadows gradually lifting from his eyes. "Dad, is Grandma coming back?" Mason asked over dessert. Drew and Christy exchanged glances. They decided to be honest with him, age-appropriately. "No, buddy," Drew said. "Grandma made some really bad choices. She hurt you, and she hurt other kids. So she's not going to be around for a while. Is that why you were at the courthouse?" "Yeah, we want to make sure all kids are safe." "Okay." Mason seemed to accept this easily, the way kids did when adults finally acted like adults. "Can I have more ice cream?" Christy laughed, the first real laugh Drew had heard from her in weeks. "Yes, you absolutely can." 2 months later, Gladys Ortega pled no contest to multiple counts of child endangerment. The prosecution had built an overwhelming case, and Earl Hughes advised her that going to trial would likely result in more severe sentencing. She received 3 years probation, a permanent ban on working with children, mandatory psychological evaluation and treatment, and a restraining order prohibiting contact with Mason until he turned 18. The school district settled with 5 families whose children Gladys had harmed. A state investigation led to policy changes about how abuse allegations were handled. Drew's documentary won several awards and was picked up by a major streaming platform. He donated all proceeds to organizations fighting childhood abuse. Christy started therapy, working through the complex trauma of realizing her mother was an abuser. Some days were harder than others, but she was present for Mason in a way she hadn't been before. And Mason? Mason slowly returned to being a kid. He put on his natural growth weight without anyone commenting. He ate ice cream without fear. He laughed more. 6 months after the hearing, Drew was in his office when Mason knocked on the door. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Always, bud. Why did Grandma do those things?" Drew set down his work and gave the question the consideration it deserved. "I think she believed she was right. She thought making kids afraid of food would help them. But here's the thing. When you're so sure you're right that you hurt people to prove it, you've lost your way. Are you always sure you're right?" Drew smiled. "Never. That's why I listen to people I trust, like Mom and Uncle Brad and you. That's why I ask questions and change my mind when I learn new things. Do you think Grandma will ever change her mind? I don't know. I hope so. But protecting you doesn't depend on whether she changes. That's my job regardless." Mason nodded, processing. "Then, thanks for protecting me, Dad." "Always," Drew said, pulling his son into a hug. "That's what dads do." That evening, Drew and Christy sat on their back porch while Mason played in the yard. The summer air was warm, fireflies just beginning to emerge. "I've been thinking," Christy said, "about going back to work. Maybe something in family advocacy, using what I've learned. I think that's a great idea." "Yeah. You've got insight that could help a lot of people. People who grew up not recognizing abuse because it came from family." Christy was quiet for a moment. "I think I owe you an apology. A real one. Chris." "No, let me say this. I chose her over Mason. Over you. Even after seeing what she'd done, part of me wanted to believe her version. I wanted to believe you were overreacting because facing the truth meant accepting my mother had been hurting people for decades. That she'd been hurting me. You were caught between 2 impossible positions. I was a mother who should have protected her child first and asked questions second. You did that. I didn't." Drew reached for her hand. "You're doing it now? That's what matters." They sat in comfortable silence, watching Mason chase fireflies. His laughter carried on the evening breeze, pure and untroubled. "Hey, Drew," Christy said softly. "Yeah. Thank you for making that phone call. For not backing down. For being strong enough when I couldn't be." Drew squeezed her hand. "We're a team. Sometimes one person carries more weight. Sometimes the other does. As long as we're both pulling in the same direction, we'll be okay." Mason ran up to them, a firefly cupped gently in his hands. "Look, I caught one." "That's amazing, bud," Drew said. "Now let it go so it can find its family." Mason opened his hands, and they all watched the firefly take flight, its light blinking into the gathering darkness. "Come on," Drew said, standing. "Let's make Sundays." As they walked inside, Mason between them, Drew felt something he hadn't felt in months. Peace. Not the fragile peace of ignoring problems, but the earned peace of fighting through darkness to reach the other side. Gladys would always be Christy's mother. That fact wouldn't change. But she would never again be the authority in their lives. She would never again have the power to hurt their son. Drew had made one phone call, yes. But that call had been the culmination of years of investigative skills, professional relationships, and a deep understanding of how systems worked and how they failed. He'd called Lloyd because he knew documentation would matter. He'd called Brad because he understood legal processes. He'd called Nora because he knew CPS needed grounds to act. He'd called Ricardo because he knew truth needed witnesses. But more than that, he'd been willing to risk his marriage, his peace, and his comfort to stand between a predator and his child. In the kitchen, as Mason debated between chocolate and strawberry sauce, ultimately choosing both, Drew caught Christy's eye. She smiled, and in that smile he saw the woman he'd married. The one who'd been buried under her mother's expectations, but was now finding her way back. "Extra whipped cream?" Drew asked Mason. "Obviously," Mason said with the gravity of an 8-year-old making an important decision. Drew piled the whipped cream high, making it ridiculous, making Mason laugh. And in that laughter, in the mundane joy of a family making Sundays on a summer evening, Drew found his victory. Not in Gladys's punishment, though that had been necessary. Not in the public vindication, though that had served its purpose. But in this, Mason's unself-conscious delight in dessert. His lack of shame. His freedom to be a kid. That was the victory. That was what the fight had been for. And watching his son eat ice cream without fear, Drew Blair knew with certainty that every difficult choice, every hard conversation, every sacrifice had been worth it. Epilogue. 1 year later, Drew received a letter. It was from a mother in Oregon who'd seen his documentary. Her mother-in-law had been exhibiting similar controlling behaviors around her daughter's eating habits. Armed with Drew's story and his documentation of what to look for, she'd intervened early. Her daughter was safe. The pattern had been broken before it escalated. "Thank you," the letter concluded, "for having the courage to speak up. You saved more than your son. You may have saved mine." Drew filed the letter in a growing folder of similar messages. Each one a reminder that telling the truth, even when it cost something, mattered. He walked to Mason's room, where his son was building an elaborate Lego spaceship. "That's impressive, bud." "Thanks. It's going to Mars." "Mars, huh? Big mission." "The biggest," Mason said with confidence. Drew ruffled his hair and left him to his building. In the hallway, he paused at a family photo from last summer. Mason grinning, gap-toothed and joyful. Christy relaxed and genuinely smiling. Drew with his arm around both of them. They'd taken that photo a month before Gladys moved to town. Looking at it now, Drew could see the warning signs he'd missed then. Christy's tension, the way she angled slightly away from the camera, years of conditioning to make herself smaller. But they'd survived. More than survived. They'd come through the fire stronger and clearer about what mattered. The doorbell rang. Brad, arriving for their weekly poker game with Ricardo and some other friends. Normal life. Good life. As Drew headed downstairs, he heard Mason's voice calling after him. "Dad? Love you. Love you too, bud." 3 words. Simple. True. Worth fighting for. Always. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.